Working security at a shopping mall sounds like an easy job. You walk round, check the locks, and sit in the break room eating pretzel. But people forget how big these places are. When the music stops and the lights dim, a mall becomes a labyrinth of shadows. The worst part isn't the silence, it's the faces. There are hundreds of fake human faces watching you from every store window. I was patrolling the second floor of a mall in Ohio. It was around AM. My route takes me past a high-end clothing store that has these hyper-realistic mannequins. They always creeped me out, especially one in a red evening gown that stood right at the front display. On my first round, she was facing the hallway, looking straight ahead. Standard stuff. I walked past, checked the fire exit, and looped back round an hour later. At 3 AM, I walked past the store again. I stopped. The mannequin in the red dress was different. She wasn't facing the hallway anymore. Her head was turned sharply to the left, looking toward the interior of the store. I rubbed my eyes. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe the cleaning crew bumped into it. But the cleaning crew had left at midnight. I felt a cold shiver, but I kept walking. I'm not getting paid enough to be scared of a doll. At 4 AM, I had to pass the store one last time before my lunch break. As I approached the glass window, my flashlight beam hit the display. The pedestal where the red dress mannequin stood was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs. I shined my light into the store. The glass doors were locked tight. The alarm system was armed. Nothing had been breached. Then I saw her. She wasn't on the pedestal. She was standing all the way at the back of the store, near the changing rooms. But she wasn't posing anymore. Her arms were down at her sides, and she was pressing her plastic face against the glass of the dressing room mirror, as if she was admiring herself. I didn't investigate. I didn't unlock the door. I ran back to the security office and watched the monitors until the sun came up. When the morning shift manager arrived, the mannequin was back on her pedestal, perfectly posed, facing the hallway. I never told anyone because I didn't want to lose my job. I convinced myself I was hallucinating, but I know what I saw. Now, be honest with me. If you were in my boots, alone in the dark, and you saw that pedestal empty, would you have unlocked that door to investigate the noise? Or would you have run back to safety like I did? Let me know in the comments what you would do. People always ask me if I see ghosts working security at a cemetery. I always tell them no. The dead are quiet. It's the living you have to worry about. Teenagers trying to hold seances, vandals, or people looking for a place to hide. That is usually what I deal with. But there was one night last November that I still can't explain. It was a windy night, leaves blowing everywhere. I was doing my rounds in the new section, which is where the fresh burials are. The ground there is soft and uneven. Round 2:30 in the morning, I heard a sound. It was rhythmic thump scrape thump scrape. It sounded exactly like a shovel hitting dirt. I immediately turned off my flashlight. I figured it was grave robbers or some sick prank. I unholstered my taser and started creeping toward the noise, stepping carefully so I wouldn't crunch on the dry leaves. The sound was getting louder thump scrape. It was coming from a plot that had been filled just that afternoon. I got within 20 feet. I could see the silhouette of a mound of dirt in the moonlight. I took a deep breath, jumped out from behind a tree, and flicked my flashlight on, shouting, "Security, don't move." The beam of light hit the grave. There was nobody there, but the sound didn't stop immediately. For about 2 seconds after the light hit the dirt, I heard one last scrape, right in front of me. Then silence. I walked up to the grave. The flowers were undisturbed. The dirt was packed down tight, exactly how the groundskeepers left it. There was no hole, no shovel, No footprints in the soft mud around the site except for my own. I was about to radio it in as a false alarm, maybe an animal. But then I looked closer at the headstone. The granite was wet, not from rain. It hadn't rained in 3 days. It was wet with muddy handprints, but they weren't smeared randomly. They were gripping the sides of the stone, as if someone had pulled themselves up out of the ground and used the headstone to stand up. I didn't finish my shift that night. I sat in my car at the front gate with the engine running until the sun came up. Now, I have to ask you, skeptics say it was just the wind or a fox scratching the stone. But I heard the shovel. If you heard digging in a cemetery at 2 a.m., would you be brave enough to go look? Or would you assume some things are better left buried? Tell me in the comments. I work at a logistics center that is essentially a massive warehouse for car parts. It's a 1/4 mile long from end to end. The lighting is terrible. Just rows and rows of high metal shelves that cast long shadows. We have a motion sensor system that is notoriously glitchy. Especially Zone 4, which is the deepest part of the warehouse where we keep the old inventory that rarely moves. Every night, round 3:15 a.m., the alarm for Zone 4 tripped. We call it the ghost shift. We usually just reset it from the desk and ignore it. My supervisor told me it's just rats or a draft from the ventilation. But last week, the system didn't just trip one. It tripped 5 times in a row. Beep, reset, beep, reset. I grabbed the flashlight and the keys. I had to go clear the sector manually so the system would stop screaming. The walk to Zone 4 takes about 10 minutes. It gets colder the further back you go. When I got there, it was dead silent. No rats. No wind. Just the hum of the high voltage lights. I walked down the main aisle, shining my light between the racks. Dust motes were dancing in the beam. Everything looked normal. I was about to turn round and radio the all clear. That's when I looked at the floor. The concrete floor in this warehouse hasn't been mopped in years. It's covered in a fine layer of grey dust. But right in the middle of the aisle, directly under the motion sensor, was a footprint. A single, barefoot, wet footprint. It was dark, soaking into the dry dust. It looked fresh, like someone had just stepped out of a swimming pool seconds ago. I shined my light round frantically. Is anyone there? Silence. I looked at the floor again to follow the trail. That was the worst part. There wasn't a trail. There were no footprints leading to that spot, and no footprints leading away from it. It was just one single, wet print, appearing out of nowhere in the middle of the aisle. I looked up. Directly above the print, 30 feet up, was the metal rafter. There was nothing up there but darkness. I backed away slowly, keeping my light trained on that wet mark until I turned the corner. I reset the alarm from the main desk, and I haven't been back to Zone 4 since. Now I have a question for you. Most security guards ignore glitchy alarms because they happen all the time. But be honest, if a sensor tripped 5 times in the dark, would you have gone back there to check it out? Or would you have just unplugged the speaker and ignored it? Tell me below. I work the front gate at a high-end private community in Florida. It's the kind of place where celebrities and retired CEOs live. Strict rules. No one gets in without a pass or a phone call. The residents here are creatures of habit. You memorize their cars, their schedules, even the sound of their engines. Vance Infirby always comes home at 2:15 a.m. from his club. He drives a custom matte black SUV with very specific rim. You can't miss it. Last Friday, at 2:15 sharp, the matte black SUV pulled up to the gate. Dark tint, custom rims, everything matched. I stepped out of the booth to wave him in. Usually, he flashes his lights or rolls down the window a crack to say hello. This time, the car just sat there, idling. The engine sounded a little different, deeper, almost like a growl. But it was late, and I was tired. I assumed he was on a call or just exhausted. I hit the button. The heavy iron gates swung open, and the SUV rolled through slowly. It didn't speed up. It just glided into the darkness of the complex. I went back to my crossword puzzle. 10 minutes later, headlights. I looked up. My blood ran cold. Pulling up to the gate was a matte black SUV. Custom rims. Vance's car. I walked out of the booth, confused. I waved him down to stop. He rolled down the window. It was definitely Vance. He looked annoyed. "What's the hold-up, son?" he asked. I stammered. I asked him if he had just gone inside and came back out. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "I've been at the club all night. This is the first time I'm home." My stomach dropped. I realized I had just let a vehicle that looked exactly like his into a secure compound. I immediately locked the gate and called the roving patrol car. I told them there was an intruder vehicle matching Vance's description inside the perimeter. They searched for an hour. The complex has one way in, one way out. I never opened the gate again. They found nothing. No black SUV parked in the wrong driveway. No tire marks, nothing. It was like the first car just dissolved into the asphalt. I checked the camera logs later. The footage shows the first car entering, but when you pause the video to look at the license plate, it's blank. Just a smooth, black rectangle. That was my last week on the job. I couldn't handle the night shift knowing that thing might still be inside. Here is a question for the comments. This is the most common security mistake in the world, trusting the car instead of the driver. Be honest, if you were tired and saw a car you recognized, would you have opened the gate? Or would you have forced them to roll down the window, risking an argument? Let me know. I work security at a data center 3 stories underground. It's basically a high-tech bunker. The security protocols here are insane. We have retina scanners, weight sensors in the floor, and airlocks. To get into the main server hall, you need 2 people to turn to separate keys at the same time. At night, it's just me in the command center. The only sound is the constant, low-frequency hum of the cooling fans. It vibrates in your teeth. It was a quiet shift until 3:33 a.m. I remember the time because all 3 screens on my desk flickered. Then, the internal intercom phone rang. I stared at it. The caller ID display didn't say front desk or main gate. It read, "Server Holby, inside." My blood froze. Holby is the most secure room in the building. It's a sealed environment. No oxygen is pumped in there to prevent fires. It's filled with inert gas. If a human walked in there without a breathing apparatus, they would pass out in 30 seconds. I checked the access logs. The door to Holby hadn't been opened in 2 days. The weight sensors showed 0 pounds on the floor, but the phone kept ringing. Ring. I pulled up the camera feed for Holby. The room was bathed in blue emergency light. Rows of black server racks stood like tombstones. The aisles were empty. There was absolutely no one in there. But on the video feed, I could see the wall-mounted phone at the far end of the room. The little red light on the handset was flashing. Someone or something had lifted the receiver off the cradle. I didn't want to touch my phone. It felt like if I picked it up, I would be letting whatever was in there out. But protocol says I have to answer internal emergency. I picked up the handset and held it to my ear. I didn't speak. For a moment, there was just static. Then, I heard a sound that made me sick. It was the sound of fingernails tapping against plastic. Tap. And then, a voice. It sounded digital, broken, like audio files spliced together. It whispered my employee ID number, 742. Open the door. I slammed the phone down. I hit the emergency lockdown button that seals the entire sector with blast doors. I didn't care if I got fired. I wasn't opening that room. When the tech team went in the next morning with hazmat suits, they found the phone dangling by its cord. The receiver was covered in frost, as if it had been held by something incredibly cold. I transferred to the day shift at a mall the next week. I'd rather deal with shoplifters than whatever is living in the wires down there. So, here is my final question for you tonight. Imagine you are deep underground, miles from help. The phone rings from a room that is full of poisonous gas. You can see on the camera that the room is empty. Do you answer the phone just to satisfy your curiosity? Or do you cut the line and run? Tell me what you would have done. You've survived another shift. We've seen mannequins that move, graves that are disturbed, and phone calls from empty rooms. If these stories kept you awake, make sure to hit the like button. It helps the channel grow in the dark. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notification. You don't want to miss the evidence we are releasing next week. Entendido? Muda para 8 historias de 700 palavras transforma su video en un long form aproximadamente 40 a 50 minutos de duraca. Isso de excelente para retenquo e monetizaco midrolads. Mas exiguma narrativa muito mais rica. Com mais detalhes atmosféricos e construco lento de tensão. Para atingir 700 palavras, new podemos apenas contra o susto. Tiros que descreva o cheiro do lugar, o cansaco do personagem, os pensamentos internos e criamos a total antes do terror começar. Aqui estão as 3 novas histórias 6, 7 e 8 expandidas para esse novo formato de Deep Dive Horror. Story 6, The School Custodian o Zelador da Escola Tema. Escolas e Noite, Barulhos no Ginásio Contagem esta moda. Approximately 700 palavras, there is something deeply unnatural about a high school. During the day, it is a chaotic ecosystem of shouting teenagers, slamming lockers, and ringing bells. But at 2 in the morning, when you are the only person inside a building meant for 2,000 people, the silence feels heavy. It presses against your ears. I worked as the head night custodian at a large high school in Minnesota for 5 years. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was my job to wax the floors, empty the trash, and make sure the doors were locked. For the most part, I loved the isolation. I could listen to my audiobooks and work at my own pace. But there was always one rule among the night staff. Stay out of the old gymnasium unless you absolutely have to go in there. The school was built in the 70s, but the old gym was part of the original building from the 1920s. It had that distinct smell, a mix of old varnish, sweat, and mildew that never quite went away. The lighting was terrible, just a few buzzing yellow bulbs that left the corners in total darkness. It was a Tuesday in late October. I was buffing the floors in the main hallway, about 300 feet away from the old gym. I turned off my buffer machine to check my phone. That's when I heard a dog thump. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sound of a basketball hitting the hardwood floor, followed by the squeak of a sneaker pivoting. I froze. My first thought wasn't ghosts, it was intruders. Kids break in all the time to play pranks or smoke under the bleachers. I grabbed my heavy maglite flashlight and the master keys, annoyed that I had to chase out some teenagers. As I walked down the long corridor toward the gym, the sounds got louder and more frequent. Thump, thump, swish. Someone was shooting hoops. Not just messing round, but playing a game. I could hear the rhythm of a dribble, the fast pace of running feet. I reached the double doors of the gym. I could hear heavy breathing on the other side. Fast, athletic breathing. I took a deep breath, gripped my flashlight like a club, and threw the doors open, shouting, "Hey, school's closed, get out." I slammed my hand on the light switch bank, flooding the room with light. The noise stopped instantly. I expected to see a couple of scared kids scrambling for the exit, but the court was empty. The dust motes danced in the light. The bleachers were pushed back against the wall. There was no ball, no players, no open windows. I stood there, feeling foolish. The silence was back, ringing in my ears. I walked to the center of the court to check for wet footprints or scuff marks. The floor was pristine, covered in a thin layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed since I mopped it 2 days ago. I turned to leave, convincing myself it was just the pipes banging or the wind on the metal roof. But as I reached the door, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It came from the equipment room on the far side of the court, a small, windowless closet where we kept the balls and nets. The door to that room was slightly ajar. Giggle. It was a soft, low giggle. Not a child, but not an adult either. Something in between. I shined my light at the door. "Is someone in there?" I called out, my voice shaking. Slowly, a basketball rolled out of the darkness of the equipment room. It rolled across the floor, slow and steady, and came to a stop right at my feet. I looked down at the ball. It was old, leather, and covered in gray dust. And on the dusty surface of the ball, clearly visible in the flashlight beam, were the imprints of fingers. But the fingers were too long. They wrapped almost entirely around the ball. Then, the door to the equipment room slammed shut with a violence that shook the floorboards. I didn't investigate. I didn't verify. I ran. I sprinted all the way back to the main office, locked myself in, and called the police. They searched the building with canine units. They found nothing. No intruder, no open doors. I quit the next morning. I didn't even give my 2 weeks' notice. People say schools are haunted by memories, but whatever rolled that ball to me wasn't a memory. It was waiting to play. Interaction hook. Here is a question. I was armed with a heavy flashlight and keys. If a ball rolled to your feet from a dark room, would you have kicked it back? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Tell me in the comments if you've ever heard something in a school that shouldn't be there. Trucking isn't just a job, it's a lifestyle of isolation. When you're hauling freight across the Nevada desert at 3 a.m., reality starts to get a little thin. We have a name for it: white line fever. It's a hypnotic state where the road markings start to float and your brain starts to fill the darkness with things that aren't there. I've been a long-haul trucker for 20 years. I've seen it all: accidents, hitchhikers who vanish, strange lights in the sky. Usually, I just turn up the radio and drink more coffee. But there is one stretch of Route 66 near the Arizona border that I will never drive at night again. It was a clear night, full moon. Visibility was perfect. I was driving my Peterbilt, hauling a load of steel pipes. I was wide awake, listening to a podcast about history. The road was a straight silver ribbon cutting through the black desert scrub. I checked my mirrors. Empty behind me. I looked ahead, empty. Then, about half a mile up the road, I saw something on the shoulder. At first, I thought it was a coyote or maybe a piece of a tire casing. But as I got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a dog. A massive, black dog sitting perfectly still on the side of the road, facing the asphalt. Now, truckers have superstition. Seeing a black dog is considered a bad omen. It supposedly means you're going to fall asleep at the wheel and die. I chuckled to myself, thinking, great, just what I need. I shifted lanes to give it space, not wanting to spook it. As I passed the dog doing about 65 miles per hour, I looked down from my cab window. The dog wasn't looking at the road. It was looking up, directly at me. Its eyes weren't reflective like an animal's eyes should be in headlights. They were just holes, pitch black voids, and it was grinning a human-like grin that showed way too many teeth. A shiver went down my spine. I watched it in my side mirror as it shrank into the distance. Just a coyote, I told myself. Just tired eyes playing tricks. 10 miles past. I relaxed. I took a sip of my coffee. Then I saw it again, standing on the shoulder, exactly half a mile ahead. The same massive black dog sitting waiting. My stomach dropped. There was no way an animal could outrun a semi-truck doing 65. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Maybe there were 2 dogs, a pack. I blew the air horn as I approached. Hunk. The dog didn't flinch. It didn't move a muscle. As I passed it the second time, I refused to look down. I kept my eyes on the horizon, but I felt it watching me. I felt the malice coming off it like heat from a radiator. I floored the gas pedal. I pushed the rig up to 75, risking a ticket. I just wanted to get to the next town. Another 10 miles. There it was. This time, it wasn't sitting on the shoulder. It was standing in the middle of my lane. I slammed on the brakes. The air brakes hissed and squealed, the trailer shuddering behind me as I fought to keep the rig straight. The truck skidded to a halt just 50 feet from the creature. It stood there in the high beams, gigantic. It must have been the size of a pony. Its fur was matted and looked like it was made of shadows. It stared at me through the windshield. Then, slowly, it stood up on its hind legs. It walked toward the truck like a man. I didn't wait to see what it wanted. I jammed the gears into reverse, backing up a 40-ton truck blindly on a desert highway. I swung the cab round, grinding the transmission, drove the wrong way down the interstate until I found a crossover. I took a detour that added 4 hours to my trip just to avoid that stretch of road. I arrived at the depot at dawn, shaking. Another driver saw me and asked what happened. I told him about the dog. He didn't laugh. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, the hound. You're lucky you stopped." The last guy who tried to run it over drove his rig straight off a cliff that wasn't on the map. Interaction hook. I've been driving for 20 years, and I've never been that scared. Some say it was a hallucination from fatigue. Others say it was a skinwalker. If you saw a creature standing in the road, would you have stopped like I did? Or would you have hit the gas and tried to run right through it? Be honest, tell me in the comments. Isolation is a strange thing. When you spend enough time alone in the wilderness, you stop feeling lonely and start feeling like you're being hosted by something ancient. I spent a summer working as a fire lookout in the Pacific Northwest. My job was to live in a 60-foot tower on top of a mountain, watching for smoke. It's a job for introverts. You have no internet, sketchy radio service, and your only view is 30 miles of dense, green pine trees in every direction. The tower is basically a glass box in the sky. At night, it turns into a fishbowl. You can't see out because of the reflection of your own lantern against the glass, but everything in the forest can see you. It was mid-July, a stiflingly hot night. I had the windows of the catwalk open to get a breeze. I was reading a book by lantern light. It was dead quiet, no wind to rustle the trees. Round 1 a.m., I heard footsteps on the stairs. The tower has a wooden staircase that wraps around the structure. It's old wood. It creaks loudly, creak. Creak, creak. I put my book down. I wasn't expecting a ranger. Hikers rarely came up this high at night. I grabbed my radio. Station for to base. Is anyone coming up to my tower? Over. Static. Negative, station 4. No personnel in your sector. Y. I hear footsteps on the stairs. Someone is coming up. Copy that. Probably a hiker lost on the trail. Keep us posted. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out onto the catwalk, looking down through the metal grating. The footsteps stopped. "Hello," I yelled down. "You can't be up here. This is government property." Silence. I shined the light down the stairs. Empty. I shined it at the base of the tower. Nothing. Must have been a deer rubbing against the posts, I muttered to myself. I went back inside and locked the door. 20 minutes later, creak, creak, creak. Louder this time, faster. Someone was running up the stairs. My heart jumped into my throat. I stood up, grabbing the fire axe we keep for emergency. The footsteps were heavy. Thump, thump, thump. They reached the top platform, right outside my door. I waited for a knock. I waited for a voice. Instead, I heard a sound that made my brain short-circuit. Creak, creak, creak. The sound wasn't coming from feet anymore. It was coming from a throat. Something standing right outside my door was mimicking the sound of the creaking stairs perfectly with its voice. It was a guttural, clicking noise, trying to sound like wood under pressure. Then, it started mimicking me. Hello, hello. Government property.hello. It wasn't a parrot. It was a distorted, raspy version of my own voice, played back like a corrupted audio file. I backed away from the door, clutching the axe. The handle of the door slowly started to turn. Open, the voice said. Double quotes, open. Station for. I screamed, get away. The turning stopped. There was a long silence. Then, a hand slapped against the glass window of the lookout. But it wasn't a hand. It looked like a pale, wet starfish with too many fingers. It slapped the glass once, leaving a smear of slime, and then nothing. The footsteps didn't go down the stairs. Whatever it was, it didn't leave the way it came. It just vanished. Or maybe it climbed onto the roof. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner with the axe, radioing for help. A helicopter came at dawn to get me. They found slime on the windows and deep scratch marks on the door frame, about 7 feet off the ground. I never went back up that tower. The forest rangers told me it was probably a bear. But bears don't speak English, and bears don't mock you with your own voice. Interaction hook. This is why I don't go camping anymore. The idea that something in the woods learns to sound like us to lure us out is terrifying. If you were in that glass box, surrounded by darkness, and heard your own voice calling you from outside, would you have looked out the window? What would you have done? Let me know below.